Drums of War, Chapter 18, To Step Up. In a heavy equipment orbital descent vehicle. PFC Michael Nguyen checked his station again. It was all squared away, all systems go, just like the last 24 checks. Still, there was not a lot of things a man could do to settle his nerves on a ride inside a tank inside a heavy equipment orbital descent vehicle. Despite being inside a heavily armored transport, he was getting pretty good readout of the approaching battlefield. Republican sensors were a damn fine thing indeed. He could see the RNI's LZ and the earthworks fortifications that they secured it from. No sight of the enemy. They were there, though. They had their own bases and fortifications. They had a month to dig in, and PFC Nguyen's instructors had made it clear that enemies disliked being dislodged after any amount of time digging in. They had told him that the longer an enemy gets to dig in, the more ornery they get about being dug out. So PFC Nguyen checked his station again and watched the LZ swell as the drop HEODV closed in. He thought back to his briefing, where he had asked a stupid question. He'd asked the platoon sergeant, "Are we supposed to take over the perimeter from the RNI while the CEs establish an FOB?" "I thought you were a Cav," Sergeant First Class Zygmunt Gorecki said as he unconsciously bared his fangs before continuing. "Well, Green Kitten, no. We're the 3rd Cavalry. We don't hold. We're going to push the perimeter out. Get me, Green Kitten." PFC Nguyen kept his posture, and impressively his tail stiff and answered, "Sir, yes, sir. Now for the rest of you greenies, we're going to be supported by our own 2 platoons of crunchies. So drivers, watch your lines. They'd probably survive getting run over, but the army will charge you for a new paint job on that armor." There was a ripple of laughter through the briefing, and he continued, "Now platoons 7 and 9 will be on our flanks, and they're doing the line push. Our main objective is here." At this point, the map of the LZ on screen behind Sergeant Gorecki changed to an aerial view of what used to be a town and had become a camp. "Now, I don't know how many of you studied the Second World War or the Europa conflagration, but I have, and to me that looks like a death camp. These buildings here are most likely prisoner housing, while these are likely barracks. There are plasma battery emplacements here, and here. Orbital sensor sweeps show lots of enemy crunchies milling around, and RNI says that there are civvies alive in there. Greenies, ask those old bloods why RNI leaving civvies in enemy hands is bad news for us. They're dug in, and our meat-powered murder missile cousins couldn't get close enough with their equipment. So they called for the cavalry, namely us. Any more stupid questions? Good, dismissed. Get to your stations." "Sir, yes, sir," had been the answer. Now PFC Nguyen was putting his mind back to his screens, as the countdown to touchdown was in seconds. He told the tank to take a look at their main objective. It was swarming with crunchies. He crunched the numbers, a rough estimate based on what Intel had said about their army capabilities, and decided that the battle screen projectors were unlikely to get hot, unless the enemy got smart and concentrated fire on a tank at a time. Enemies were rarely polite enough to do as you wished, however. PFC Nguyen jumped and didn't bother trying to get his spur along his spine to lay flat again when the tank commander, who happened to be Sergeant Gorecki, asked, "Nervous, Green Kitten?" The HEODV touched down, and the tank lurched out onto the planet. A nice smooth ride down, thanks to the lunatic shot at the planet like meat murder missiles. In any case, the tank trundled forwards, and PFC Nguyen told his instruments to take a look at the nearest plasma artillery emplacement. And whether there were any obstacles, he answered, "Sir, yes, sir." "Dispense with the sir." "Yes, sir," in the can, kid. "We're all tankers here. Just one, sir, will do." "Yes, sir." "Me too, kid." "You?" At this, the gunner, coaxial gunner, driver, ammo tech, and even the Digitan assistant driver burst out laughing. It seemed to PFC Nguyen that Sergeant Gorecki was putting up with them rather than him. "Only an idiot isn't nervous in combat. There's a bunch of enemies over there who don't know they only exist to be destroyed. Speaking of, sir, have a read on one of their auxiliary batteries. Shall I ask for a triangulation?" "Do it, kid." He did so, and with that calculated the range and angle for the first shot of the battle. He wondered what the history books would call it, if they even noticed. "Target acquired," the gunner said. "Fire HE and shrapnel," Sergeant Gorecki ordered. "Yes, sir, HE and shrapnel," the ammo tech answered, as he ordered the correct shells into the chamber. "Firing! Hit! Target destroyed." "Good shot, boys," came the lieutenant's voice over the comms. "They didn't even see you coming. The rest have noticed us now, though. Charge! We remember this thing." Vengeance for the Honor Guard, PFC Nguyen found himself yelling. For the Honor Guard! His fellow tankers rejoined. Do you suppose we'll get to name our tanks, sir? The assistant driver asked over the helmet speakers. If we do, it'll be first shot. The tank platoon charged with infantry supporting from behind. The enemy began to rain down hot plasma on the tanks, to little effect. PFC Nguyen concentrated on his sensor readouts. The tank depended on him to see danger and identify targets. On clans of Aldra, Agri-World 13, behind the cavalry advanced. Saw Medtech Emily Sullivan rode a Graven with a lump in her throat and a weight in her belly. She could see the war's devastation, some of it weeks old, some of it hours. And she knew that she'd be hoarding corpses. She'd never been a religious woman, but she sent up a prayer or a vibe or whatever to the universe or karma or whatever that she'd find a living person that she could help. A muted boom of something exploding came over her speakers, and she glanced to the horizon where the army had tanks of men killing the baby killers. Good, she thought privately. I hope I don't have to rescue one of them. Emily didn't voice the sentiment. It wasn't proper. Medtech Juan Hernandez wasn't a very proper Tsar Corpsman, though. I hope they put a bullet in every last one of their heads. Europa Concord be damned. You'll pull out and treat every wounded, regardless of side, soldier boy, Captain Ramirez said. Now he was a proper Tsar Corpsman. So proper, Emily only knew him by his rank and surname. He might even be named Captain, for all she knew. These hands heal, sir. I won't kid again, not even by neglect. Emily pointedly ignored the doggo's tucking tail along with the rest of her team. I'm here to save the Republic. I'm just bitter at them is all. Good. Speaking of them, don't let your guard down. These guys might not have the concept of dignified treatment and reasonable accommodations for prisoners of war. The army has had some casualties, but they've been mostly evac. There are 2 MIAs, though, so be on the lookout and announce yourself. They can get a little shoot first, ask later-y when they're wounded and cut off. Specialist Alexei Petrov said in accented commercial English. Bilinguals are always a delight to Emmy, and she considered once again whether she should learn High Japanese like her grand had wanted. She put the notion out of her mind and focused on her teammates' advice. Really, that's what they were doing. Politely advising the probie disguised as banter and reminders for each other. Gun grunts, Dr. Sarah Patel sighed as she checked her field surgery kit. The army makes them that way on purpose, in case someone other than us gets to them first. Enemy corpses are easier to stomach, Medtech Hernandez mused. Our fighting boys aren't allowed to die, Captain Ramirez said sternly, but you just try and stop a gun grunt from breaking the rules. Thanks, guys, Emily said with a warm smile. They could all see through her transparent faceplate. Well, Cap, we have a probie you saw through our theater show, Specialist Petrov said. Now what? Now we dismount and start treating the survivors of Objective Alpha 1 Section 2. The murder camp, Emily whispered. The murder camp, closest to the landing zone. There are more. Army did triage and patched up the worst they could, Dr. Patel informed the team as they walked into the recent battlefield and current field hospital. Those buildings are too damaged for the infantry to search thoroughly in time allowed, Captain Ramirez stated as he pointed to a charred husk and a pile of rubble. Specialist Petrov, take Medtech Takahashi and see who you can pull out. Got it, boss. Emily, this way. Emily took a deep breath and loped after him. She had thought that she was prepared. She was wrong. The buildings had collapsed and burned under shelling from the tanks, and while they were barracks of the enemy, their faces were close enough to Hewen that she could see the anguish they must have felt as they were crushed to death. Worse than the dynasticals, the local bipedal beetles and victims of the Exarch invasion. She couldn't read their expressions very well, but limbs twisted at unsettling angles and fluid seeped from behind compound eyes, for thick ichor congeals below cracks in their exoskeletons was enough information to make a rough guess. They felt as though she was stabbed at the sight of each mangled corpse, but she had trained for this. She began helping Specialist Petrov clear rubble to access spaces that might harbor survivors, including said corpses. Though the suit did most of the lifting, it was taxing work. Somehow, each crushed body seemed to weigh 2 tons each, though the rubble was feather light. Emily knew it was her mind and body trying to reconcile the grief she felt for these strangers. But that did not make it any easier. She kept working. Emmy! Came Specialist Petrov's call over the comms, and her HUD showed a blinking arrow. She looked where it directed, and when she was correctly oriented, the remains of a stairwell was highlighted. Then there was a shadowy form of someone breathing. Emily was over in a flash, saying, "Got a read on injuries, Alex? Exarch, broken leg at the least. She's pinned by rubble, and I'd need to get closer to see more," he answered, as he directed a light deeper into the dim. Emily saw it was as he said. She had forgotten how much she hated the Exarch for the invasion of the clans of Aldra, for the Wee Sing, for the last stand of the honor guard. There was a person in front of her who needed rescuing, and that person's allegiance mattered as much as a puff of breath in the wind. "The rubble she's under looks like trouble." "You are correct. This is why you will pull her out as I shift the rubble. Understood?" "Got it," she said, and they got to work. Aboard Among Startides We Rage, Marvin the Marvel was terrified. The capacity for terror was the thing that made him even more than just a jumped-up program, he told himself. It was true, of course, but it was cold comfort to the terror. He'd only ever been XO for a ship, never a fleet, and apparently the Starslayers do things a little differently than the Republic. He wanted to be on the We Rage, though, so he had to abide by the Starsailor customs and admit to facts that his ship had attracted a fleet, therefore making the captain an XO into Lord Admiral and High XO. That made the We Rage a flagship. That made the We Rage even more of a target. She was speeding along in hyperspace now, full of rage and fury, looking to strike the Exarch Dominion's rear fleet elements, and therefore cut the invasion off from their home nation. It was a good plan, but Marvin the Marvel didn't much fancy the idea of being responsible for so many ships. It helped that every last one of them had a Digitan or two aboard, often as XO or comms officer. At least he could work at computing speeds rather than thinking speed for most things. Still though, his repaired coat ached at the thought of coordinating the upcoming combat action. Lord Admiral Brextron was on the bridge, but he had wisely assigned another to captain the ship. Instead, he was seated in the command chair, overlooking a holotable that projected one of the enemy battle groups. It was comprised of 20 of the Exarch-called battleships, 10 possible carriers, if those bays were an indicator, and 2 cruisers for each of the other classes of ships. The Republic would have called that destroyer group with light carriers and corvette escorts. The sheer numbers might pose a problem for their fleet, but unlike the clans of Aldra, the Starsailors had not neglected their weapons. They had kept up, even on ships never exposed to pirates, a very high degree of combat readiness, and had thus always outfitted them in Republican-made weapon systems. At the splitting of the fleet, about half of those ships replaced their cargo capacity or passenger capacity for war weapons. 15 such ships, what the Starsailors called frigates, but what Marvin the Martian would call destroyers if they were in Republican service. Well, they were in a way, by treaty, but they kept their own naval traditions. "Are you nervous?" Lord Admiral Braxton asked quietly. Marvin the Marvel noticed that he had very politely asked too quietly to be heard by any of the organics. "Terrified," Marvin the Marvel said directly into his friend's implant. "Shall I relieve you?" "No, sir. I can regulate. I shall match your courage, if I can." "Aye, sir," the Digitan said before continuing over the bridge speakers. "Dropping into real space in 10, 9, 8, 7. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.